Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you. I've dedicated the month of January to Chinese and Asian food. So I had to do my very favorite Mongolian beef. This is what I always order for takeout. Here are the ingredients. Please pause and write them down. There are quite a few, but we'll go over them. While you're paused, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you click the little bell at the top right, you'll get a notice when I post new videos, about twice a week. Now let's get cooking. So here are our ingredients. I've got 2 fairly nice pieces of round steak, about 12 ounces total. This is hoisin sauce. It's kind of sweet. We'll make it in another video. And I have reduced sodium soy sauce. You can use the full sodium if you like. Have some oyster sauce and some sesame oil. The rest of the ingredients: ginger, garlic, leeks, chicken broth, cornstarch. I'll show you as we use them. So first we're going to prep the beef. And you can use about any kind of beef you want, because the way we cut it, it's going to make almost anything tender. But I wouldn't suggest a chuck or a brisket. You want to get something that's kind of solid. Now I'm going to trim this little bit of silver skin off, just because it would be kind of chewy. And if I had any excess fat, I would trim that off too, but it doesn't look like we have any on this. This is super lean. And I've let this come to room temperature before I've started with it. And I've dabbed it off with a paper towel to get it nice and dry, because we're going to fry this, and you want to always start out with drying the meat if you're going to fry it. So take the time to trim this off, being very careful. This is a super sharp knife. This is a little ceramic knife. If you haven't tried one, you might like to. So we've got it dry. I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to cut it, once I get it trimmed, sort of on the bias. And we want to cut against the grain. And I'm going to show you the grain here, just so you'll know. If you're ever looking for the grain on meat, you can see it. It's like little strips right down through there. And you want to cut against that for the tenderest cut. And this one we're going to cut very thinly and on the bias. You see, kind of sideways like that. You'll get a nice thin piece. And when you cook this, it's almost always going to be tender when you cut it this way. And I'll just let you see a couple of the slices. Little piece of fat there to trim off. So I'm going to cut through. I'm going to slice this one down the middle first, just so that my pieces are a little more narrow. So I'm going to cut through both of these pieces, and then I'll be back. So it's all cut up and in the bowl. And because I didn't have on gloves when I cut this meat, I'm going to wash my hands, and then I'll add the sauces for the marinade. So I'm going to start out with soy sauce, and you're not going to see me measure all this. I'm estimating, and I put the estimated amounts. But that might vary if you have a little more beef or a little less beef. So that was the soy sauce. This is a couple tablespoons full of oyster sauce. And then I'm going to add the hoisin sauce. Now, if you're not familiar with this sauce, it's a sweet fermented bean paste. It tastes not as sweet as sweet and sour, but it's like brown sugar mixed with a bean paste and a little bit of pepper. It's really good. So I'm just going to mix all this up and make sure that all the meat is covered in a little of it. And then we're going to let this marinade for anywhere from an hour to 4 hours, 8 hours if you need it to. You could make it the night before. and cover it up with some plastic and put it in the fridge. And just make sure that you have enough. If you don't, add a little bit more. We don't want it swimming, but we do want every bit of the meat to have some of the marinade on it. And I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap. And as I said, I'm going to set it in the fridge. And I'll probably leave mine in a couple hours. It's about 3 in the afternoon and I'm having it for dinner. So now I'll prep the other ingredients. I have about 1 inch of ginger root there, tablespoonful of chopped garlic, couple leeks. You would use 5 or 6 green onions if you weren't using leeks. Either works. Green onions is more common. I sometimes have trouble finding green onions in the winter. In the spring and the summer, I have my own. So I've just grated up this ginger root, and I'll chop the last couple little pieces because I want to use it all. And you know, if you have powdered ginger or ground ginger, you could use that, but ooh, fresh ginger is so good. If you haven't tried it, you really should. And now to the leeks. I'm going to cut the white part and the green part separately. I'm going to use them both, but I'm going to cut them up and use them separately. So for the white part, I split it down the middle, flip it on the flat side, and these we're going to just chop pretty thinly. And if you aren't using a leek, you might want to cut up about half of an onion here and then have the green onions because they don't have a lot of the thick part, the white part. So I'm giving this a really good chop because I want it minced pretty finely. And you know, most of these recipes that I've been researching to do for you, you can make all kinds of substitutions. Now the top part of the leeks, I always separate out. What I was showing you there was a dirty spot inside, and I've never found a leek that didn't have a dirty spot up in the green part. So I always separate them and wash them separately. And I want to cut these a little differently. I'm going to cut them down in slices, and then I'll cut these slices to make them a little bit smaller. If you're using green onions, you want them to be about 1 inch or so long, and probably cut them on the bias. That would just be my preference. You can cut them any way you like, but about 1 inch long. There you go. Now I'm going to give them another little chop and put these in a separate bowl because they get added at different times. There you go. So here we go. This is all the vegetables that go in this. Now let's go back to the meat. It should be ready. So I've poured this into the spider and I'm draining off any of the excess marinade. And we're going to bread it. And I have about 1/2 cup of cornstarch in there, and I'll add more. It was kind of hard to tell you in the ingredients how much cornstarch we'd need because I just don't know yet. But you need enough to bread each one of these pieces individually. That's one of the things about Mongolian beef is you fry the beef and then you put the sauce on it. So I'm just going to put this in and stir it around. Adding more cornstarch as I need to. And we're not going to bread this as much as we would, say, fried chicken or pork chop, but we do want to have some of the cornstarch on every piece, and we want to get a little bit of crust on every piece when we fry it. So I'm just going to add it until I think I've achieved that. And then we'll make the sauce. Now that's the little bit of marinade that I poured off the beef. And to it I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of soy sauce. And I'm going to put some of the hoisin sauce in here. That's about 2 tablespoons full. It adds a little sweetness. And then I'm going to add the oyster sauce. And if you've seen me struggle with this bottle of oyster sauce, it's glass, it's not plastic, I can't squeeze it, and it's thick. So I'm going to put about 2 or 3 tablespoons in here, maybe as much as 4. It tastes really good, so you can't use too much. Next time I buy oyster sauce, I'm going to look for a plastic bottle or pour it up in a plastic bottle, but I haven't done that yet. Then I'll just stir all that together, and that doesn't look like a lot of sauce, but really this is just the seasoning. We actually make a gravy, and I'll show you that now. I'm pouring up a ½ cup of chicken broth, and you can use beef broth if you would rather, but chicken broth is kind of universal. You can use it in almost any recipe. You know, I really love the different sauces and gravies in the different Asian and Chinese and Thai food. And this particular one has always been one of my favorites. And with the oyster sauce and the hoisin sauce, you can use them as the basis of so many of the different sauces that you use in Chinese food. So we're going to get this mixed up really well so I have everything done when we move to the stove, and that would be right now. So I have here one of my 10-inch skillets, cast iron skillets. No, you don't have to have a wok. And I have put about a 1/4 inch of oil in it, and I've got it on medium-high heat up to about 350 degrees, and you can check that. That's medium-high. And when I drop this in, it sizzles right away. So my oil is hot enough. You don't have to have a wok, by the way. You can do this all in cast iron, and it works just fine. You know, cast iron works for almost anything. So I'm going to drop the beef pieces in one at a time. And I'm not going to crowd them because I want them to get just a little crispy. Not as crisp as fried chicken, but I want each one to have just a little bit of crust on it. So I'm going to cook these in 2 batches and spread them out in the pan. And they only have to cook about 2 minutes on each side, because remember, we cut these really thinly. So they're going to cook really quickly. And I'll move them around a bit till they let go. Keeping them moving. And you know, when I fry chicken or pork chops or something, I'll tell you not to move it until the crust forms. But these are so thin, I'm moving them a little bit before the crust forms. So some of it comes off, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be a thick crust. See, we're getting nice browning on it. And because I moved them a little bit soon, I have a little cornstarch on my turner here. But that's okay. I'll clean it off between my batches. This looks right. I know it's done. It's been cooking long enough. We're going to take these up. And I'll put these in a bowl. And yeah, a little of that cornstarch is sticking, but it's okay. Nothing's scorched, nothing's burned. I'll get some of the oil off of it, put them in a bowl to the side. And then I'm going to scrape the fond off and put in the second batch, and then I'll be back. So the beef is finished, and I've scraped the fond from the pan and just left it in there. And I'm adding my leek tops, or your onions if that's what you're using. And we're going to get a little browning on these. And I may have to add a little more oil. If I do, I'll add sesame oil. Just stir these around. And I'm going to add the ginger and garlic, but I let these cook a bit first because I don't want the ginger and garlic to scorch. They don't need to cook quite as much. Of course, none of this cooks very much. Now, you will have noticed that I haven't added any salt and pepper so far because I always add salt and pepper. there goes my ginger. I'm finding in cooking Chinese food that the soy sauce is a bit salty for me. So I have taken to waiting till the end and checking to see if I need any more salt. Because you know you can always add it, but you can't take it out. So I'm putting in the sauce now. This is the mixture we made with the hoisin sauce and the oyster sauce and the soy sauce. And I'm just going to let all of that simmer together for a minute. Get it all because it's so good. And when that simmers, we're going to add our chicken broth slurry. And I'll stir that in. And I'm probably going to add as much as another half cup of chicken broth because this will be very thick. It'll get very thick. And I don't want the gravy to be too thick. So I just add the last half cup as I need it so I have more control over it. We want this sauce, gravy, whatever we want to call it, to stick to the meat, not fall all over the rice. And by the way, I have some steamed rice over here already done. Just sitting covered right now, steaming. And you'll see that's getting pretty darn thick. I gotta tell you, this smells really good too. So just keep stirring. You don't have to cook anything long, but you have to keep stirring. That was about a 1/4 cup more. We'll stir that in and make sure it's hot all the way through. And now I'm going to give it a taste for salt. Just a little bit. And as I suspected, I don't need any. The soy sauce is, even the reduced sodium soy sauce has a lot of salt. And now I'm going back in with the meat. And we're going to stir that in. And if the gravy has gotten too thick to cover all the meat, I will add even a little more chicken broth. I'm up to 3/4 cup now. Remember, your goal is to have enough of the sauce to cover all the meat and for it not to be so thin that it falls off. And I think that's what we've got. By the time this gets all stirred up and hot, it's going to be just right. Now we have one ingredient left, and that's the tops of the leeks. And we want those to still be crunchy. They would be tops of green onions if that's what you were using. And we're going to just stir this all in. And we'll let it, when I get it all stirred in, we're going to let it simmer just long enough for the leek tops or the onion tops to wilt just a little. We don't want them to be soggy, just a little wilted, and to be covered in the sauce. Just like this. I'm going to plate up some rice and cover it in this yummy stuff. See that nice thick sauce? And then I'm going to chow down. I'll be right back. And there you have it. I just think that's gorgeous. The smell is divine. I'm going to jump in here for a taste. And yes, I'm going to try chopsticks. And you know, I actually eat with chopsticks all the time. I just have trouble doing it around the camera. So I'm going to get a little of that rice. And that's that wonderful steamed rice. I have a video on how to do that. So good. I do recommend this. I hope you try it. I hope you like it. And I hope to see you again tomorrow.